Get ready for a heavy one. I'm Mark Gober, and this is another full-length interview from my podcast, Where is My Mind? Let me tell you something. I interviewed a lot of people for the show, and this was among the most powerful. I really think that simply hearing these stories could change someone's life. Dannion Brinkley has had 4, you heard me correctly, 4 near-death experiences. They occurred as a result of electrocution, open-heart surgery, twice, and brain surgery. What's even heavier is that each time he had a life review. He relived the events in his life, and he felt the pain that he caused in others. So as you can imagine, this changed his life dramatically. I think we can all learn from Dannion's mind-blowing stories. For more on Dannion Brinkley and his books, see markgober.com/podcast. Buckle up for this one. So Dannion, the way we can do this is just to have a free-flowing conversation, and we can just get started, I guess, with your background and maybe everything leading up to your first near-death experience.
I have no problems. Have you had Raymond on?
I have, yeah. No, I've had Raymond Moody. I've had Eben Alexander, Barbara Bartolome, Alan Huguenot, Jeff Olson, Bruce Grayson, Pim Van Lommel.
Bruce is wonderful. I mean, I remember, Mark, when only like 1 or 2 people had been dead. Now everybody's been dead. I remember when it was just, Raymond was going to medical school at the hospital they brought me in.
Wow. Well, you've seen the evolution.
So I've been there since the very first days. I've watched everything that everybody went through in the beginning. And, Raymond and I became fast friends, and we spent 20 years together, pushing this forward, because once I had this experience, it was life-changing for me. It was truly changing, because I grew up a tough guy. I grew up in sports, and I was a street fighter. Then I discovered the Marine Corps and various agencies of the federal government. And my life was just about the reality of what was in front of you. And the first thing I thought was how hard I could hit it. And the second thing was to see what it did when I hit it the second time. And then all of a sudden I'm talking on the telephone, and I get sitting on the edge of the bed with the phone cradled in my left hand. And I'm talking on the phone, and lightning strikes the phone line and comes down the phone line. It hits me just above my ear. It goes down my spine. It welds the nails of the heels of my shoes to the nails in the floor. It throws me in the air, suspends me in the air, and I discovered a different side of the reality of who we truly are. And when I discovered that, and then came what is now the classical near-death experience, and what ended up being prophecies. The boxes of knowledge became to be that I didn't honestly know it was going to be future events, Mark. What I thought it was a timeline I was given to keep me on task to fulfill the 2 tasks I thought I was sent back to achieve. And so when all of this happened, it was an emotional 2 to 3 years of learning to walk and feed myself. I was dead for 28 minutes. Completely paralyzed for 6 days, partially paralyzed for 7 months. It took me 2 years to learn to walk and feed myself. And I'm going down that same path again. By the time people hear this podcast, 90 days ago, I was dead. So seems like about every 10 or 15 years, I have to kill myself just to keep from getting bored. Because over here is quite boring compared to over there. But this is a job that people choose to come on and are chosen to come on. And without putting those kinds of things in their thought patterns as they listen to people talking about the near-death experience, they miss so much of what the true meaning is. And like in your book, Dispelling That the Brain Creates Consciousness, I think for people who've had this experience, we think that's a funny topic. But for people who haven't had this experience, who's always tried to physically understand, control, and manipulate conscious reality, I guess it's okay for them to think that there is nothing outside of what we call this life. And what happens is that is a frightfully funny place to think that this is all there is.
Well, that's the perspective that I certainly came from with a very traditional educational background until I was exposed to the knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never bought this. I don't blame people for not believing in this stuff, except by now, 40 years later. I mean, 40 years later, the NDE, a term coined by Raymond, is now mainstream media. And it's used as a recognizable phrase describing so many things, an event, the television, everybody uses that term. So I can see what's happened over the last 40 years and see how much people have grown and how innovative they've become in their spiritual consciousness equal to their physical consciousness.
I'd love to dive in a bit more on the actual nature of the experience for those who have never had a near-death experience and maybe have just heard about it in the mainstream media. And we can start perhaps with the first one you had, and then we can talk about the other ones. But so you were electrocuted, and then what happened to your consciousness?
Well, what happens is the first thing you realize is nobody dies. The whole concept that's been put forth, Mark, about what happens after death, and so religions and institutions and governments have so tried to control this reality. But what happened to me is all of a sudden I was burning and on fire, and I was paralyzed, and I could not see because there was a ball of fire that came with the lightning that burnt my eyes. I had to wear welder's glasses for like a year. I couldn't go in bright light. I couldn't drive. I couldn't do any of that stuff. I just laid in bed. But when I lifted out of my body at the end of the lightning strike, I lifted out of my body, I could see again. I felt no pain. I was completely disconnected. What people have to understand is the person that they think that they are in this life, like I as Dannion Brinkley, what people don't think is who you are in this life is a happy combination of everything you hope somebody's going to like about you. And you develop a personality based on that social psychological structure. But once you free yourself from this, you take your last breath. You change. You go back to being who you truly are. I believe that everybody's a great, powerful, and mighty spiritual being with dignity, direction, and purpose. The great, powerful, and mighty is an earned position. Spiritual being with dignity, direction, and purpose is your natural state of consciousness. So I was aware that there was a different me. There is a higher consciousness that observes the disassociative nature of once you leave this physical body. And it's like a relief. You know, there was no pain. I could see. I was aware of what was going on around me. And the thing I think, Mark, that was so amazing to me is even though it may appear to be inanimate, it is still alive. And saying alive is, you can't say that a countertop or a chest of drawers or a rock is alive, but it has a level of consciousness to it. And once you leave this physical body, you become aware of that. You know, it's so amazing to me that people think they see and know so much when what you see with your eyes is like 0.008% of what's going on around you. And what you hear is like 0.00004% of the sounds that are going on around you. So for us to come to conclusions that we think we know anything about who we are spiritually, it's just a mistake. We don't have the facilities to be able to consciously absorb, understand, and see who we are and what the meaning of this event and this thing we call life is. So when I was watching this, I was watching them, the paramedics come and work on me. I watched them put me in the ambulance. I figured I'd better go along with my body wherever it was going, and I was in the ambulance, and I was above and behind the paramedic, and he was talking in headsets to the hospital, and then he said, he's gone, And I thought, gone where? I'm here, the paramedics here, the lump is there. Where have we gone? And at that point, it wasn't something that I heard, Mark, but it was something that I was aware of. There became to be over my left shoulder a spiral, a spinning, and you say tunnel because that's a good way for people to see it, but it was moving whether I was moving or not. And at a certain point, I began to be pulled down that tunnel. And when I came into this place of bright, brilliant, beautiful light, it had a silvery blue hue to it. And I was paying attention to it. And I had what is now known as the Panoramic Life Review, which I think was probably the single most transformative part of this experience. Everybody, and realize that I have been through 4 of these. Struck by lightning, open heart surgery, brain surgery, open heart surgery.
Wow.
Okay? And this is over a 40-year period. Plus, I have had 6 out-of-body experiences, some in conjunction with the near-death experience, and some in the course of flatlining and having to be resuscitated. So in looking at going through 4 of these experiences and 6 out-of-body experiences, I have a pretty good range on how it works. But everybody has to get ready, no matter what. These are the lessons that you'll learn. You will see your entire life pass before you in a 360-degree panoramic life review, and you will realize that you have missed nothing. It was just what you chose to focus on. You will watch yourself from a second-person point of view as though you were your own best friend. And you see, and I always say it's funny, you see some of the dumbest things that anybody could possibly do, but you also see some of the smartest things that you could have done. And it's like a friend talking to a friend. And then you literally become every person that you ever encounter, and you feel the direct results of your interaction between you and that person. And what does that tell you? The universe is fair and just, and nobody gets away with anything. So the comfort that people can draw from it is if someone has hurt you in your life, they will know that. And if someone's brought you joy, they'll also know that. And in the end, Mark, this is a Dannionism, but what is the meaning of life? And I put it like this. If God couldn't come today and God sent you, in the life you just reviewed, what difference did you and God make? Or if whatever you believe to be divine could not represent the divine that day, and it was your job, then what difference did you and the divine make? So for me, I became a hospice volunteer because the difference with the knowledge that I had of what was going on and what I saw, I could be at the bedside of veterans. Since I served in the Marine Corps, then I could be at the bedside of veterans and I could help them find closure and cross over. So if what I say and what I'm trying to get across to people was true, then everybody who says they've had a near-death experience, it should have had some kind of transactionable nature like that, because having this experience demands that you really focus on who you truly are as opposed to who everybody has helped create you to be.
Going back to the life review, how long did it feel like it lasted?
Well, I have no concept of time. I mean, this had to have all happened in a 28-minute period. Okay, because this last one I had was 6 hours of surgery. I had to have open heart surgery, and it was 6 hours. It didn't appear the events that transpired. I had a panoramic life review again. That was my 4th one. The worst part about going to the other side is the panoramic life review doesn't pick up where it left off.
So you've relived certain things 4 times.
Right. Exactly. That's why I always say, I have a pretty good understanding of how this all works. And, you don't ever get away with anything. And when people accept that, they have to take a good look at what their intentions are. What is the reason for why you're doing what you're doing? What is your intention? And make sure that your intentions don't develop themselves into motives. because a motive gives you the ability to rationalize something that your intentions think that you think is good for you when it's not really. So the panoramic life review, once that's over, there was no more thoughts in the first near-death experience. There was no more thoughts about the earthly life. I went to this place where it was, I call them crystal cities. It was like driving into Denver at night where you see all the houses lit up on the sides of the mountains. So I knew there were many crystal cities, and I could remember from being a kid in the Bible that in Genesis it says there are 7 heavens. So it made sense to me from that point of view, because I grew up in the deep South, and everybody goes to hell from South Carolina. You hear that all day, every day, fundamentalist psychology. So I could relate to it. But what the biggest thing is, we have become to be frightened of something that is natural. Kat and I are working on, we have 10 things to know before you go, which is a book that I think that people really need to read, because it comes from 31 years of being in the VA and having more than 33,000 hours at the bedside. And I look at what helps people create closure. So when seeing how many people are not finished with how they look at their own life, and especially from a spiritual point of view, they think religion and spirituality are the same thing, which they are not. And then I have another book that we're working on now called Guaranteed and Inevitable.
Can't wait to read those.
Well, because transition from this world to the next is guaranteed and inevitable. So in this book that we have now, it's called 10 Things to Know Before You Go. And the first page is, what's the number one cause of death in America and most other countries? ? Turn to the second page and it says, no matter what you thought, birth is the number one cause of death. See? And then you turn to the next page, it says, remember, if you're breathing, you're leaving. And if you just took a breath, this book is for you. I try to find, Mark, a lighthearted way to look at this event. And although I've been through the worst parts, years of learning to walk and feed myself, and then open heart surgery and brain surgery, and then open heart surgery, and then cardiac arrest, this last experience was 90 days ago. 90 days ago, I had to have open heart surgery. And when I came from the surgery, they brought me into intensive care, and I had no blood pressure. So they had to resuscitate me, put 4 pints of blood in me, and resuscitate me. And then 5 days after that surgery, on a 2:00 on a Sunday morning, I went into cardiac arrest. And in the cardiac arrest, I witnessed them working on me. I knew I was conscious. I knew who the nurses were who broke my ribs, pounding on my chest. They brought me back and resuscitated me. But the moment I flatlined, I was standing next to the nurse, looking at them work on me. And the difference was in the body, while I was in that body, I was aware of how frantic it was. But standing next to the nurse, looking down at everybody being frantic, I was very, very calm. And they resuscitated me, and I stayed here about 7 minutes, and then I flatlined again, and they had to use electric pedals to resuscitate me. So I'm dealing with open heart surgery, my 4th near-death experience, and then 2 out-of-body experiences within 90 days from now.
So in all of these instances of the near-death experience, you had a life review, and you talk about how in some cases you're experiencing or reliving the events through the eyes of the people that you affected. Did that also apply to, like, in an indirect way, where like if you affected someone and then that had an effect on their life, did you then experience it from those around that person?
You did, but you didn't feel it as intense as it was with the original reaction. You have to remember, you affect, it's amazing to realize as a little human being in a world so completely crazy that every thought that you have is affecting the entire universe. That's how important you are as a spiritual being to enter this third dimensional plane to appear to believe that you are physical. It's an impossible concept, but none of that is true. And you know as well as I do that none of that's true. There's no such thing as anything that's physical. It's not that way. It's just that this third dimension allows us to think that so we can feel as though we're separate from the reality that we live in, so that we can see and be able to capable of affecting change, supposedly for the good. It's just then by understanding the panoramic life review is the art form of how you should live.
How have you seen the panoramic life review evolve throughout your 4 different near-death experiences? So have you kind of improved in the more recent experiences based on what you've learned?
I'm like a wunderkind. I mean, keeping your heart open becomes one of the most important things once you've had a near-death experience. Forgiveness becomes a very important thing because, and I laugh when I say this, Mark, but forgiveness is a powerful, powerful tool, because as long as you hold on to something, you stand between them and justice. And so forgiving someone is like taking a step to the right and putting them in direct conflict with the actions of what the Panoramic Life Review purports to show. I have seen myself grow a lot. And I also say this, the near-death experiences have been important, but Catherine, my wife, and my kids have been just as important. And relationships with people as I've come through this life has been important. I mean, there is not one single concept that you can give to set up the value of who you are and how much you love and how much you are loved that would determine it. But in each of these experiences, when I'd get to the place where I left off, I could see how much I've grown from this. I think that I study the near-death experience and mostly I pay attention to the Panoramic Life Review. I've been with 2,010 people going from this world to the next, and I have more than 100 that have been resuscitated. And because I have known them as they were facing that gateway, then it was easy to talk to me. Because people ask me all the time, how many people do you tell about the near-death experience in hospice? And I'll say about 1 in 40. Because it's not about me, it's about them. And it's about them finding closure and finding resolution with this life from an authentic point of view instead of all that other stuff that we're taught. There is nothing, you're all going to hell. All that guilt and sin concepts. None of that stuff works. And none of that stuff is really true.
So from your perspective, having lived this so many times, why do you think it is that we exist in this human realm to go through these experiences and then judge ourselves?
I don't think that we judge ourselves.
Okay.
I think we observe what the events were. I mean, you choose to come here and you're chosen to come here. The most important fact, if you're here, you were chosen to be here. And that is a rare privilege, because here, when I say that if God couldn't come today and God sent you, then the purpose of this life is to appear to be separate from everything else so you can observe your ability to make a difference. Not that it's affecting you, but how you are affecting it. We all get so caught up in the ideas of how pitiful we are, or how bad we are, or how helpless we are, when none of that is true either. I mean, none of it's true. We come here to practice being divine. And in practicing being divine, think of this, Mark. Write down everything that people hope that God is in their life. Make a list. Caring, loving, compassionate, all that. All those things that you think the divine is. And then make a list of how many opportunities per day you get a chance to be all of those. You get a chance to be caring, compassionate, loving, faithful, supportive, Okay, so everything that everybody hopes that they hope that God is, they have a chance to be that every day. So let's apply it like this. If I'm going to be every person I have ever encountered, and I'm going to feel the direct results of my interaction between that person, then of the 2010 people that I have seen go from this world to the next, and 346 taking their last breath, then what did I see when I became that person? That's the secret. What did I see? I got to see me looking up in the eyes of a divine being at that bedside, making the difference in the place where it's most important. You know, in the Bible it says, where the two or more gather in my name, so shall I be among you. Well, then where is the greatest opportunity for somebody to test that theory? At the bedside. Because it's you, the person in transition, and to know if that's true or not. Well, the Panoramic Life Review teaches that that's true. Remember, I've been through 4 of these, 1975, 1989, 1997, and 2018.
Have you experienced a shared death experience at the bedside where you kind of enter this other realm along with the person who is going through the death or near-death experience?
Almost every time.
And how is that different than your own near-death experiences?
Well, what it is that if you're paying attention to somebody's breath, you know, the whole art form is breathing, you know, and for people to understand that the breath is what holds it all together. You know, there's multiple bodies. You think that it's just you and of emotions, okay, but there are multiple bodies. I think there are 7 bodies that have to come together, and it's held together by your breath as though that was the string that they threaded through all the bodies. And the thing that when you stop to think for a moment that what you breathed in and what you breathed out in less than a second has no composition. It's completely different in composition. You breathe in air, nitrogen, oxygen, minerals, and then you breathe out carbon dioxide. So look how fast that you breathe in and you breathe out that completely changes the composition of the world that you live in. See, when you have a near-death experience, Mark, those kind of things become very important. Breathing becomes very important. How well you pay attention to your breath becomes important, because the deeper you breathe and the more sustained and controlled you deal with your breath, the more aware you become of other dimensional realities, especially when the gateway opens or the vortex opens for one to go from this world to the next. I think shared experiences, you get a chance, especially if in conversation, and I pay attention to the tone in a person's voice, and I pay attention to their breathing, because at that point, I can pick up a lot of information about that person, which helps in shared experiences. I don't see the shared experiences as such a grandiose deal. I mean, because all it does is it makes you hunger for your journey home.
Yeah, it sounds like the near-death experience is kind of a pleasant realm, or it takes you to a pleasant realm. Could you describe the feelings that you've had during the near-death experience?
Well, it's euphoria. And the best word that I could find in English is sensual. If you look for an English word that describes that place, it's sensual. You know, and we have so many connotations of that word, but when you are everything and everything is you, what kind of feeling would you have? It's euphoric. And it's a place that, this is the thing that got me, Mark. We all want to be recognized. I mean, I think that there are 3 drivers in the human experience: appreciation, admiration, and inspiration. Everybody wants to be appreciated, or they want to appreciate something. Everybody wants to admire something or be admired. And everybody wants to inspire something or be inspired. And those are the basic level concepts that we operate from in this dimension. Well, when you get to the other side, or when you make that transition dimensionally, the fact that you are recognized by the entire universe and you are aware that you are recognized is an elated feeling. Like I said, we all want to be recognized, but what happens when you are recognized and that you are recognized by a divine force and your existence is glorified, quote unquote, in that recognition? So those feelings, when we think about feelings here, we attach them to emotions. Okay, we attach our feelings to emotions. Well, here's what I think about emotions. I think that the physical, mental, and emotional are one consciousness. Emotions can make you cry or make you happy. Okay? They can make you sad or they can bring you joy. But what is it predicated on? On how much you like or dislike whatever's occurring. And that's what triggers emotions. And then there's the ethereal level of consciousness that emotions give you some kind of moment to connect with, but without meditation and quiet, calm direction and setting an intention of what you want to achieve in a day or in your sleep, none of that ever really works.
You briefly described what the realms looked like you talked about a crystal city, that sort of a feeling. Could you provide more specificity on what it looked like and what types of entities were there? Could you identify what they were and what their motives were?
Well, their intention was to be supportive. And these beings were radiant. The first time, I've seen these beings plenty of times now. I've seen them in this realm here because living in death, quote unquote, you lose a lot of the barriers that we all psychologically create. Being a hospice volunteer for 40 years, there are so many things that most people live in fear of or have fright about that I don't. And when you look at these beings, I have never seen a being that looked in physical like we look in form. They're energetic, but they have an emotional level of interaction with you, almost as if it's telepathic. And the fact that you are not separate from them, it's really hard to describe, Mark, non-separatistness. Can you imagine what it's like to see an energetic being and know that it's a part of you and you're a part of it? That's a hard place. And everything that you see over there, you know you're a part of it and it's part of you. Okay? There is no separation, just like the Higgs boson particle here and CERN. Dark matter. We've now proven dark matter, that the entire universe is suspended in this dark matter. I think that's a funny name for the divine force, but because out in space it's black, so dark matter is an appropriate term. But we have now a quantum entanglement perspective on the fact that we are all connected, and it's a scientifically replicatable perspective. So where do people go? Why are we still thinking about stuff that happened thousands of years ago when we have a spiritual model on a scientific basis called quantum?
So what was it actually like to be in this other realm? Was it, how would you describe it?
I would say, for me, I never knew I was going back. Now as these things happen to me, I always look for signs of if they're going to send me back or not, because if I could figure out how to get away with it, I would not be back here, but I keep getting sent back. And it's like maybe they don't want me over there, or maybe I just want to finish what I started. I've come a long way since Raymond and lying in that bed, and many days with Raymond rocking in the rocking chair. And Raymond Moody is one of the funniest human beings you will ever meet. But you know how psychiatrists are.
Yeah.
You have to keep your eye on them every minute. I used to call him the Rain Man.
Well, he's a good guy. And he's an important
great
researcher.
And he's funny. But the NDE, quoting the near-death experience, and I was around in the very early days when it was all sitting in my living room or Raymond's living room, and the early researchers and Ken Ring and Bruce Grayson and Michael Sabom and Ian Stevenson, these early researchers, and watching the curiosity. For none of these people have ever had a near-death experience. They're just studiers of it and quantitative information gatherers. And then those of us who've had this love them and appreciate them. But see, for me, I don't live it with all those conscious ties that hold us back from living life as full as we possibly can. People have to understand, you're only here a short time, and you got to practice setting an intention of what you want to achieve and persevere through it, good and bad, so that you can see how to be caring, compassionate, and heart-centered. It's not about who makes the most money. I never seen a U-Haul on the back of a hearse. Okay, it's about how much kindness and how much love and how much compassionate you put on this earth, because those are the rails that spirituality runs on in creating unfoldment. And when people are kind and loving and caring, you remember them a lot longer than you remember the billionaire or the legacy that they created.
So going back to the entities that you've now seen several times, these energetic beings, what's your sense for their role in the universe? What are they doing when they're not interacting with you during the near-death experience?
I think there are multi-dimensionals. I'm under, without any question, especially based on this last experience, Mark. This last experience was, and I'm still developing a language. You know, I'm like that. When you don't have a language that benefits the listener, you know, if you're just talking and hoping they're going to appreciate what you're saying because it happened to you in a lot of times in a dramatic fashion, then I don't think that serves the listening public. I think what has to happen is you have to develop a language that allows people to hear and it benefit them. And I hope I'm doing that now. I mean, 6 times, it's not exactly a thrill a minute to me, and I'm still recovering from, I have another year from open heart surgery and a couple of broken ribs and that kind of stuff. But I'm still developing it. But the point was this: there are many levels of consciousness. I mean, and then there are levels of subconsciousness of those consciousnesses. And we are functioning on many, many levels at the same time. You know, when I always laugh when I heard about that people that people leave their bodies when they're asleep because you have sleep deprivation, or you have sleep paralysis coming back into your body. Well, when they said that we're operating on, quantum says we operate on between 7 and 17 different levels. This is a scientific viewpoint. The first thing I realized is no wonder I was so tired when I woke up in the morning. If I'm functioning on all those levels, having half as much fun as I'm having in this life, then no wonder I'm tired. But when you start to look at how science is saying, and these beings came around because they were guiding me. Because in the first experience, I saw these 13 beings, and they were illuminated, and they were inside this crystal city, and they would each send this box of information, you know, like if you Saved by the Light. There are so many things that I saw that were future events. I didn't know they were future events then, Mark. I didn't know it for 4 years when Raymond called me. It was Raymond who called me, and he was the only person I told about it. And then I realized that these future events I thought was a timeline. But what I realized is that all of this stuff goes on at the same time. It's just where you're focusing. We happen to be focusing because we're breathing in this dimensional plane that appears to be physical. But there are other parts of you functioning on other levels. And think about this. You can hear a bird singing in the distance and be on your computer. And yet you're still focusing on your computer, but you're hearing the bird. And you become aware of so many things. It's just where you're focusing your attention. So people pay attention to meditation, and they pay attention that they're a spiritual being first. And you start looking at your life when you open up your eyes in the morning, that your job is to make the divine difference. To be able to be at that place that helps, that opens that door, that pats somebody on the back, that smiles, that gives a person that support, that gives the guy on the corner $1. That kind of stuff is the big stuff that matters in the panoramic life review. None of that stuff that we think is important, fame and all that. Look how elusive and how unstable that illusion is. When kindness always is appreciated and gratitude is the key to making the transition from this world to the next. Am I boring?
No, this is incredible. I love letting you talk, and hearing your experience in this much detail is going to be great for the listeners, so thank you. I have a bunch of other questions. I would love to hear more about your experience in combat and how that came across in the Panoramic Life Review.
I got to be every person that I had ever encountered, and it was horrible. And I got to feel what people who would never see that person again went through. So killing in anything but self-defense is wrong, and nobody gets away with it. And I've had to go through this within the last 90 days. I had to go back through all of that, and I was vicious, Mark. I'm a big guy, and I was, Marine, and I was tough, and the more damage I could do, the better I felt, until you have a panoramic life review. And then children who will never see their dad again. I mean, those kind of things bear on you. And when you have to keep going through it, they don't let you forget that you have done your time in the earth plane. And that's a good thing.
So it sounds like space also doesn't really exist in the way we perceive it, because if the children were affected and they weren't in the same location as where the combat occurred, you were just kind of able to move with your consciousness in different points in space.
You were everywhere. It's just where you focus. Mm-hmm. But in the panoramic life review, this is how it works. You've never missed anything. You know how many hairs was in the nose of the doctor who pulled you from your mother, if that's what you were focused on. I mean, and you know how many leaves was on every tree. You know every label. You know the badge name of every nurse. Everybody's in that room. You don't miss anything. It's just what you chose to do, and what you were chosen to do becomes your focus. And that's usually how you carry out your life. Very few people fail to achieve their goal. And some people get so bent out of shape with it that we see what control and what narcissism and what domination has come. And the religions and institutions and governments create more problems than any other issue that you can think of. And everybody tries to control and manipulate your true reality, and you're controlling your physical identity. When I never was a big religious buff, when I was growing up as a kid, I was always having to go to the what was called the RAs, the Royal Ambassadors Weekend for Wayward Boys. Because I knocked out a couple of school teachers, and I didn't have any problems of fight, and it didn't matter where it was, and so I went to the RAs. So they were trying to tell me that the earth was 6,000 years old, and that I figured that Steven Seagal had to be Jurassic Park, not Steven Seagal.
Spielberg?
Steven Spielberg had to be the devil. Because I asked them about dinosaur bones, because we'd seen an exhibit, and they said the devil put there to throw us off so they couldn't be 100 million years old. And then the big story was I was guilty of not knocking out the teacher, but what I was guilty of was what some people were doing in the desert 6,000 years ago. And the story was, here was a girl who saw a snake, and then the snake started talking to her. And the snake wanted her to get her boyfriend to eat an apple so he could realize he was naked. And how could I be guilty of that, Mark? I didn't see any pictures. I didn't see any video. I wasn't there. And when you go from this world to the next world, none of that stuff ever appears. I mean, a lot of people are describing it in religious as a context. People see Jesus. I can understand when they say that it's Jesus or they've seen God. Okay, I can understand because I've been there, but that's not what's happening. I mean, there are those infinite beings, because so many people, when I saw the 13 beings, there were 12 beings in a row. And as each one would focus on, there was a 13th being to the right that was controlling it. Well, people immediately put that as the disciples and Jesus. Okay. Well, maybe it was, but that's not how I saw it. I never put religion. I've never had in any of these four experiences have religion been a subject matter. So I believe that how people interpret, when you come back and try to find a language here, it's hard to describe what is happening. And the only spiritual context, like mainstream has, is religion. So it's easy for me to understand how they would frame it that way, but that's not really what's happening. You are a unique, beautiful, powerful, dynamic being. You had to have worked and achieved great levels of success to even be able to have the opportunity to enter a physical body and to have a life here so that you can physically appear to be separate, so that you can make the difference in the appreciation, admiration, and inspiration of others, and for them to be, and for them to appreciate and aspire and be admired by you. That's the goals. And I work that way every day. I mean, I try to be that every day. And do I always succeed? No. But is that when I get up in the day that this is my goal? That I can make a difference in the lives of people that I encounter and smile and ask people in the grocery store, can I help them or with the groceries, and just things like that. This is what matters once you get back home.
Earlier, you said that it's almost like we choose to be here. I'd love to hear more about the choosing process and what makes you think that we're choosing, and then also seem not to remember that we chose it.
Yeah, well, and that you never missed anything. You think about what you're doing when you have your life review. You see your childhood. You see it. You see yourself from birth. You see that from birth. There's not anything odd about it, and it's just the natural state. But what happens is the only way that you enter this plane is first you're chosen, because there is no one better than you to be born where you were born, with the parents and the family that you were born with. There is no one better than you to interact in this dimension than you. That's how you were chosen to get here. Then you choose to get here because you make decisions about what you want to encounter in this life, to see how you act, to see how you handle it, to see how well you persevere, overcome, or empower others. I mean, these things are not difficult, Mark. This is the reality of who we are as spiritual beings. This is the way we are structured when we come here. And once a person starts to look at their life based on these simple principles, they start to see more about this life, and they get closer to that shared experience without having to be at the bedside. I have more friends on the other side than I probably have here. Okay, because I created the Twilight Brigade. I decided that watching where veterans were, and I think the greatness of a country is how it takes care of its helpers and how it takes care of its veterans. And so I, along with Catherine and some close friends, we created the Twilight Brigade that became one of the largest end-of-life care volunteer programs for dying veterans in the history of this country. And so that is what I feel like was the goal. I called it spiritualistic capitalism. I wrote books and sold books. And I spent the money developing the Twilight Brigade and funding it. So, you find ways to see how to enact and bring about what you chose to do with what you were chosen to do.
So taking that example and bringing it to the life review, when you re-experienced that in the life review, you felt the joy that you brought to others?
The safety. And you see yourself looking up in a divine, you have no idea of who you're going to be, Mark, when you are that person in that bed, scared to death, feeling abandoned, betrayed, and left, and who's isolated and alienated because we are not designed to fight wars. We are not. And who's isolated and their families from them, and it's just them alone and by themselves, as if they'd just been thrown away. And when you're there at that bedside, and some of these people, because I've worked in 11 VAs, I worked 10 years in the Washington VA and 21 years in the West Los Angeles VA, which is the largest VA hospital system in America. And when you get a chance to see who you are in their eyes looking up at you, it is not you that you see. You get to see your divine spiritual self show itself to that person. So when I listen to people tell me how wonderful I am for the work that I do, I always try to tell them I know too much about me to be impressed. But I'm smart. You don't have to kill me but 2 or 3 times before I catch on.
So along those lines, how have the near-death experiences differed?
Well, the third one was the most different. The third one, all of them are the same basics, except that they show me more things. I guess I keep earning the right to see a greater understanding because I became the universe in this last surgery, in this open heart surgery, which means I haven't kept my heart open. The first time when I had open heart surgery, when I was 39 years old, I had become embittered. As a hospice volunteer, you see injustice and you see people trying to make money and you see people underpaid. People who care and loving are underpaid, and I didn't keep my heart open. I got a staph infection that ate my aortic valve, and I was drowning in my own blood. And the doctor told me when I went in, he said that if I didn't get me in surgery, I would be dead in 45 minutes. And the last thing I remember was the crash cart coming. Okay, so I didn't keep my heart open. And this last experience, I didn't keep my heart open. And I see the injustice in the VA system. I see the absolute disillusionment that comes with people who are the caring, loving, bedside manner that you need in helping people go from this world to the next. And I see that the system is failing. The VA system is failing because it's bureaucracy as opposed to compassionate, caring service. And the people who are compassionate and caring are not usually strong enough to defend themselves. So I became an advocate for veterans issues. That's one thing I'm famous for. I have fought for veterans issues on every platform that you can fight for. And I didn't keep my heart open. So what happened? I got an aneurysm. And that aneurysm was blocking the aortic valve. And then I had veins that were collapsing. So I was not going to make it. And this is so important, everybody. You got to keep your heart centered open. No matter who you're mad at, no matter how much injustice or how unfair the world is, you have to keep a loving, compassionate perspective because the divine systems and the divine laws are in place. No one gets away with anything, and there is a set way that it works. You hear the commonalities in the near-death experience, and since I'm obsessive compulsive, then I study all of that and I pay attention to it. But if you don't keep your heart-centered focus that you're a spiritual being and that you are the difference that the divine makes in a nature as if you are separate from everything else, then you have already have a lost cause. This is the most important thing because when you have that place, you don't mess up as much. And you know when to stop, and you know when to take a breath, and you know when to send appreciation and develop an art of forgiveness. You can't just say, okay, I forgive you, because that doesn't work either. We have consciousness and subconsciousnesses, okay? And we have stuff that we hold and keep back, okay? So you have to have a nature of develop that's an art form of forgiveness. I do it with the Panoramic Life Review. I have one every night. When I get into bed at night, I go over the day and see and look and see what I could have done better, how well I did at some things, and I pay attention to my breathing. In the course of a day, I will stop at least three times a day, and I'll do it for 2 or 3 minutes. and I'll pay attention to quietly. I put my earplugs in that I keep in my pocket, and I slow down and pay attention to my breathing so that that energetic nature of myself is allowed in to inspire me, to appreciate me, or to admire me. And you'll be amazed that once you start this art form, everybody wants everything to be a science. Well, Michelangelo was not a scientist. Okay, Leonardo da Vinci were not scientists, these were artists. And once that art is in place in your life, you become so much more aware of what's going on, and you get insights into how to handle it because you enter the flow. Look at sound. Look at whatever wavelength that sound comes in, and look how many different ways that you can measure sound and how you can hear that sound, especially if it's linear acoustical. If you're moving air, that's completely different than other ways at which you perceive sound. And look how many different ways that it happens. All right? And when you do that, how much more aware do you need to be is based on how often you use these techniques. I use these techniques at the bedside, Mark, because sometimes sometimes I've only known these people 2 hours, but some, because I've been in the VA, I've known for 7 years. But if you sit quietly, you pay attention to their breathing, you listen to the sound of their voice, and you make it about them, never about you, you'll be amazed at how much you pick up. And now in business and in conversations with people, I do the same thing. If I can pay attention to the rate of their breathing, and I can hear the sound in their voice. Everybody has a unique sound, like a mantra. This is what everybody has. And once you hear that sound, then you begin to disconnect and reconnect. You disconnect from the physical and connect to the ethereal nature of a person, and you'll know an awful lot about that person that they would have not told you.
You mentioned that there appear to be laws that are in place. Could you speak more about the laws, how they're set, and why it is that those of us on Earth who haven't had a near-death experience don't explicitly seem to know them?
Well, I believe that we all know them. I think that what you choose, what you were chosen to do and what you choose to do constitutes where your focus is. And there are laws, like everybody can think all night long that the sun's not going to come up. And you can think that all night long, but guess what? The sun's going to come up. Well, there are inherent laws that function. Look at the atmosphere. The atmosphere is electrical. You have an atmosphere, a stratosphere, and an ionosphere. Positive, negative, and neutral in two subspheres that operate. How many people every day look outside and think that the atmosphere that they're walking around in is electrical? And then they say, well, how in the world can that possibly be? Well, go look up electrical weather modification patterns. And there are 48 weather modification patterns. All are electrical. So when we look at what we call climate change, I think that if you find the companies who are licenses those patents and you look at that as an effect on climate change, it begins to change the picture. So there are inherent laws that you can access. What people call sixth senses or psychic, or I call empathic, they exist regardless. It's like when we were kids and you had a transistor radio. Before there was transistors, it was just shaved crystals that had a frequency flowing through it, and you turn that dial and you could pick up AM, amplitude modulation. You would pick up different stations based on a crystal that you took out of the ground. And that's the first crystal radios. Well, when you look at the fact that you can turn those frequencies, that you're able to pick up those levels of consciousness based on your intention and how and what you need to better serve compassionate caring, you gain access to those levels of consciousness. I do it. And when you talk about it, how I can say it, I can get up from the dead. I can raise me from the dead, mostly because I have no choice. because I'm either going to lie in that bed and leave again, or I'm going to have to make choices in order to do it. And I access those levels of consciousness and those laws. Like right now, I'm functioning at a little less than 20% heart function.
You're doing great. I would never know it.
Well, that's exactly what the doctor told me. I went to see all 90 days, my 90-day visits, and the word that I've learned to dislike the most in English is miracle. I get tired of hearing it. And she asked me, the surgeon, she said, "How did you get here?" I said, "I drove here." And she said, "There is no way you could have done that." I said, "Yeah, okay. If it makes you happy to think that, Doc, it's okay with me, but I got stuff to do."
So you've had 4 near-death experiences and 2 out-of-body experiences. How have
I had 6 out-of-body experiences.
6 out-of-body experiences and 4 near-death experiences.
Right.
How have the 6 out-of-body experiences differed from the near-death experiences?
Okay, the out-of-body experiences are just separated from the body. And when you have a near-death, because we were still talking about the third near-death experience that was different from the other 3.
Yes.
So let's get back to that. But the out-of-body experience, it happens to everybody when you sleep. I mean, it just happens to me every time I've been dead or had or was on life support. I mean, I've been dead 3 times because struck by lightning and then cardiac arrest just 90 days ago. Okay, so dead 3 times. And an out-of-body experience shows you without any question, like what your book says, the brain does not create consciousness. Mm-hmm. Consciousness creates and operates through the brain. But in the body, where people make a mistake, Mark, is this. The body has 2 brains. It has that gray matter in your head, which is 60% fat, that lives off of oxygen, sugar, and trace minerals, and a healthy dose of nitrogen. But you have a digestive system that is the body's brain. And that body doesn't care what your brain thinks. It will eat itself to survive and to sustain. So finding the balance in there is what becomes important when you start to look at where consciousness is. But the out-of-body experiences have always been precursors to near-death experiences for me, except this last time, which I'd already had the near-death experience. I do not remember. I remember coming at the end of the tunnel. I don't remember floating above. Every other time I watched the lightning. I don't remember what happened in the emergency room in the lightning because I wasn't there. I watched the open heart surgery. I watched them cut me open. I watched them do this. I listened to the conversations. I had conversation with the doctors and the nurses after the surgery. They couldn't believe. They thought that I was awake and the anesthesia hadn't worked, but I could tell them what they were talking about. Okay, and so what happens is this last time, it was for me to observe the difference, and I had to make choices. Why it happened twice in the cardiac arrest was knowing that I'm right where I am at 20%, and I may get to 40% in the rest of my life, and I have to face that. But I have things that I have to accomplish because I chose to fulfill the vision. All right, so I was aware of making choices when I was going through the out-of-body experiences of flatlining. I was aware that I was making choices and that what I'm going to have to deal with, and is it going to be tough? Yeah, it's going to be tough. Okay, and how am I going to deal with it? I don't quite know how, but am I willing, based on what I want to achieve, am I willing to bite the bullet? Yes, I am. I am not afraid of pain. I have been in enough pain. I have lightning went down my spine, so you know what my spine is like. And so I'm not afraid of facing it. But so there are the laws that at work. It's how you access those laws. And look at meditation. Look at yogis. Look at Tibetan monks. I mean, they melt in snow. And they got a guy in India. They got a guy in India who's been in a cell. He's 3 months or 3 weeks, no water, no food. He never urinates, and he has not gone to the bathroom, and he's a breatharian. Now, how in the heck do you do that? And he's locked up in a military base. So the potential of accesses to those laws and the understanding of those kinds of things are pretty apparent when you look in the right places. So in the third near-death experience, which was brain surgery, okay, so normally I lift out of my body and I float above. I did this every other time. But in this time, I was standing at the end of the bed and I was watching. This is 1997. I'm 47 years old. And I have 4 subdural hematomas. So they had to do brain surgery. But I was standing at the end of the bed. I was not floating above. I was standing at the end of the bed. I watched them put my head in a cradle. I watched them shave the side of my head. And then I watched them start to drill the holes in my head. Okay? And I started down the tunnel. But where I always thought in the tunnel, when you lifted out of your body before the tunnel, this was a place that I thought was where you acclimated, where you acclimate toward being aware that you're no longer physical and that you're becoming spiritual, or what I call ethereal again. And so I just always thought of that the first 2 times because it wasn't a big deal. But this time, when I started down the tunnel, I became aware of in the third time, and they were going to show this to me. I mean, I don't think that I did it because I was in a different position, in which I would have paid attention to, dead or alive. I'm really nosy and really curious no matter what. and so looking at it, this level of consciousness is where the Tibetans call it the bardo, Catholics call it purgatory. And I never believed in ghosts or, that kind of stuff, attachments and exorcisms. Even after being dead, I never bought into that. And people who have reincarnation, I never bought into it because I didn't have anything that related until I met John Mack. He was a psychiatrist at Harvard. And he and Brian Weiss honestly got me to, before I had the third experience, to at least give it value. But there's a place where once you lift out of your body, until you get down the tunnel and you're going to the Panoramic Life Review, you're not bound by anything. You don't have to let go. And a lot of people stay in that dimensional place. When I was so curious about this dimension of where people trap themselves, they trap themselves there. You can't stay there forever, but you can hold on. Alcoholics and drug addicts, that's why they call it spirits. They stay close to that level of frequency and that consciousness. People who felt betrayed, like all this stuff to dealing with the Catholics and the abuse of children. Do you think a child who was abused by a priest wants to go down the tunnel? Not going to happen.
Right.
And so I saw a lot of that, a lot of abuse. But what I saw was veterans. I saw a lot of people from a lot of American wars because I understood the uniforms. Okay. And I'm sorry that my near-death experiences have a lot to do with Americana, because I guess that's the nature of me growing up the way it is I am and believing like the family. And, we've been in every war and everything. That we came to America in 1757, 1751. We bought land in 1757. And the house that we have in South Carolina was built in 1805. And the history of America is in that house.
Wow. And
so, the same house, the same place from the Revolutionary War, 1812, Civil War. We've all been a part of that. And so I guess that's what is my focus and my attention. But there is a level of consciousness that easy where ghosts live. I can understand ghosts. I can understand attachments. I can understand people being not possessed, but allowing a frequency in that energy to create a way that you can come across that veil. And then reincarnation. I can understand reincarnation from seeing this level of consciousness. Okay, and I was fixated. I was so fixated, Mark. I was in recovery after brain surgery. I was in recovery for 41 hours. I spent literally 2 days in this level of consciousness. And when I came back, I decided that I would create the Twilight Brigade because I needed these guys to not get trapped there. And there were so many that I now know of the thousands that I have helped go from this world to the next that never had to get feeling that sense of betrayal.
So by helping them with their emotional state before they passed away, you think they can forego that state? They would actually pass through it.
And not only that, they can reach back over and help someone who I'm sitting at the bedside with, somebody from over there who I helped make it or one of my people helped make it, can reach back and reach their hand across and help them come on across. Twilight Brigade, we work on both sides of the veil.
How does that work, working from the other side, helping those that are on this side? Like, what are the mechanics of that?
The mechanics is there's an energetic pattern that you can relate to. Veterans can relate to veterans. There's a brotherhood. And if you're a Marine, then it's more than a brotherhood, it's a family. And that level of consciousness permeates so much of the spiritual nature of life, the sense of unity, the sense of union, the sense of safety, and the sense of protection. What happens when you're in a unit in the military, especially in combat? These are inherent natures that exist in the spiritual dimensions of reality. So the know that people reach across. I have seen people lift out of their bodies. I have seen people come to get them. I mean, I would say in the thousands the tens of thousands of hours, I can say 18 times out of 2,010 people, it is without any question, I have seen someone come to get them. I think one of the most important witnesses of that was my mother. When my mother was in transition in 1984, she called me in the room and she said, "Don't let them hurt me anymore," because they were cauterizing her lungs. And I said, "Okay." And she said, "I'm going now." And she said, "Marion has come." And she was looking over my left shoulder. So I turned and looked over my left shoulder and I could see a silhouette. I'm like 34 years old. I knew who Marion was, but I'd never seen Marion. When my mother was 16 years old, she had a 14-year-old sister named Marion. And my mother was a basketball star at the school they were going to, and they were going to a basketball game. And you know how when you're 16 years old, you don't want a younger sister up with the stars at the front of the bus. And the basketball team made mother send Marion away. And Marion was walking back down the aisle, and the bus hit a bump, and it had a door. The emergency door was on the side. It fell open, and Marion fell out, and it slung her under the bus, and the bus ran over her. Well, I could not think of a greater thing that God could do than to send Marion to tell my mother it was okay to let go, because she was holding on for my dad and holding on for my brother and holding on for my sister and holding on for everybody else when she had lupus and Raynaud's disease. And there is no way she was going to make it. No way. And I kept saying, "Mother, what are you doing? What are you doing?" Well, when I saw Marion, that was really what started me down the hospice trail, because I knew then at that moment, I'd gone through several people, but I saw AIDS. I saw what was happening with veterans and AIDS. And then if you had it, if you walked on the same side of the street, and veterans were put in homes, they weren't put in VAs, and they were kept separate. So when I saw what they were going through based on what mother was going through, I think that's what really got me becoming a hospice volunteer. But my mother, fundamentalist, die-hard, thumper, she saw her sister. And how that who else in the world could come to get her to let go greater than Marion? Nobody.
Right. It had to be that extreme and that clear.
for her to let go and leave my dad. I mean, they were never apart. They never spent a night apart except when my mother went to visit her mother. But other than that, they were always together, and, you know, they were just the perfect parents. And that's what gave her the strength to let go. So I can tell you this too, Mark. When people are really afraid, somebody comes. And I can hear people tell me stuff about what people say, like we call it fae. When a person all of a sudden gets conscious and they wake up, they're really coming to say goodbye. And mama's coming home, or she just came out of it, or dad came out of it. Well, when somebody is that afraid of who they truly are, somebody will come. And there are certain languaging that you can hear when people say, well, I'm tired, I'm ready to go, you know, and they have a 360-degree transition or turn from what they were saying to all of a sudden everything was okay. And because somebody comes and lets you know, and it's somebody like came from Mother Marion, there could be nobody greater. I mean, and all that I've been through, that's one of the most remarkable moments of watching what happened for my mom, and what the fact that she could say it to me and know that it was reinforcing me, and also at the same time giving her permission. Because the last thing she told me was take care of your dad. And I started taking my father to the VA. He's a World War II disabled veteran. And I started where she would go with him. I started going with him to the VA. And that changed the whole nature of me.
It's really amazing how many experiences that you've had personally, whereas some people don't have any of these experiences in their life.
Well, that's because they're smarter than me. And that's because they're not as hard-headed, or it doesn't take as much for them to realize that they are divine beings. People have experiences that transform their lives. Mine is that for some reason, and I don't really know all those reasons, Mark, you know, because I don't try to figure all that out, because then I have to focus too much on me. And I don't think it's all about me. I think it's about everybody else, you know, and how can I help them find a level of consciousness that's calm, that's focused, that's compassionate, that's caring, and keeps their heart open. And I think that this experience I just went through will make sure until the last breath I breathe, I will be heart-centered. Okay. And maybe this too. In order to help people, to be of as much help as I can possibly be, I have to experience it. I have to know. You know, you don't want to walk up to people and say, I know what you're going through, because nobody knows what anybody's going through. But I know what you're going through. I've been there. You know, and I think that I can convey that in a way in my conversation and my personality and my style that's reassuring for people, because I wouldn't tell them something that wasn't true. Because if I'm going to be every person I ever encountered, and I'm telling them something based on what I'm saying that's betraying them and their trust in the divine, what kind of fool am I?
Well, I think you're an incredible messenger, and that's one of the reasons I feel so passionate about doing this podcast, is allowing people to hear stories like yours so that they can have the knowledge that you didn't have when you went through these experiences, and hopefully can avoid pitfalls. They can make better decisions, or just live differently based on the amazing experiences you've had.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say I'd rather hear it than tell it. I mean, we are going through this. And whose fault is it? This is what I always say that's funny. This is me being funny, Mark. God was hanging out. And, you know the only difference between God and a doctor?
What's that?
God never thinks she's a doctor. Okay?
Yeah.
So God's out there hanging out, and they're watching what everybody's doing. And because of, first we were physical, then we became chemical. Now we're becoming quantum. We're becoming electrical. So God's watching all of this, and people are starting to believe in chemistry, which means it's a dead universe, whereas a near-death experience means it's a living universe. because chemistry says there's nothing but chemical reactions. The brain produces consciousness. When it has oxygen brain deprivation, temporal lobe seizures, anaphylactic shock, this is what triggers these kind of experiences. There's nothing outside of that consciousness. Well, that's all stupid. So when you all of a sudden, when you have the nature of how this experience operates, and the divine says, well, okay, I need more people to have an opportunity to believe in themselves, so I'm going to send a bunch of them back. So whose fault is it that there is a such thing as the near-death experience in the modern day era? Okay, because people have been having this thing since the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks. You know, there's thousands of years, 7,000 years, people were writing about it. But now, whose fault is it? It's the advancements in cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It's medicines, it's doctors bringing us back. So the fact that I've survived 6 of these experiences, whose fault is it? It's modern medicine's fault. So now all of a sudden, instead of it being a religious experience, it is a medical phenomena. And as it becomes a medical phenomena, then you have to pay attention to it from a medical point of view. And Raymond was the person that raised that flag. And he was the one brave enough to take the heat. And he sincerely took the heat, Mark. I mean, I watched literally the destruction of his entire personal and emotional life. He paid a great price for seeking to bring this information out. I honor that because I was there. I mean, I was there in those hard nights and watching this whole world fall apart. So for all of us who tell these stories, and for all of us that have them, for everybody that's listening to me, there's about 25% of everybody who will tell you that story that's not true. Because when you have that near-death experience as a part of everyday phenomena, people can use those kinds of, that term, an NDE, for overdosing, for drug hallucinations, for all kinds of things, because it means it's acceptable. So it's not really, everybody who's had a near-death experience has a certain sound in their voice. You can hear it. There is a certain place in their voice that always goes to a nature of calm, and you can listen for it. And then when people use that, a lot of times, you know, you got to accept the fact that not everybody's telling you the truth, you know, because if I can get you to believe I had this experience, then I can rationalize the fact that the experience that I had was brought about by some divine or some experience out of the ordinary of my own natural self, when it was you who did it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm curious, you've kind of alluded to this by giving pointers to the listeners, but if you had to summarize your advice to the listeners based on all the experiences that you've had, what would you tell people about living their day-to-day lives so that they don't have to go through a near-death experience to learn the lessons?
Well, wait a minute. Listen, be who you are. If you're the difference that the divine makes, and that's the way you frame the Lific view or the great book of judgment. I mean, look at the biblical nature of the Hall of Records, the Akashic Records, the great book of judgment. Look at all that. What are you being judged? What's being judged? I mean, you're being judged on how godlike you are, you know, but created in that image. Okay. Now, religion has taken it to that place. And when you look at religion, my God, think of how crazy all that stuff is. But when you look at what you're going to be judged for, the panoramic life of you frames it. It frames it. Everybody sees their life pass before them. Okay. Well, what passed before them? What you want to do is set a direction each day. And when you get at the end of your day, see how well you stayed at that intention. You know, like Catherine, I use, because I'm not really good at setting intentions, so I use Catherine's book, Jewels for the Soul. It's on Amazon. And it sets until you come up with your own intentions. She has a book that are books of intentions. And when you start to do this, everybody, and you look at an intention that I'm going to be as kind as I can, I'm not going to let myself get out of control, because you can usually anticipate what you're going to deal with that day, and that you're going to hold and you're going to stay. And at the end of the day that you have done it, you're building on your own spiritual success. And remember, nobody gets away with anything. Nobody. You will be. It's a fair and just universe, and everything is structured. Look at neutrinos, subatomic particle, a neutrino, and it is orderly as much as we can determine about it. So the universe is orderly, fair, and just. Remember that, and you're going to be every person that you ever encounter, and you're going to feel the direct results of your interaction between you and that person. That becomes the most important thing of when you're looking at somebody, or when you're deciding whether to help them or whether not to help them. Both of those are very conscious decisions. And remember, nobody dies. It's the biggest hoax, the biggest delusion that ever has been perpetuated or perpetrated on spiritual beings in the three-dimensional physical form that we call this life. It is not true. You will not die. It will not happen. You're not going to hell, unless you really want to go to hell. You can work really hard and threaten them when you get over there. When that being of light comes to meet you, tell them you want to go to hell. I'm sure somebody will accommodate you. And when somebody asked me they said, Mr. Brinkley, based on your personality, what about hell? I said, well, I didn't bring it up when I got over there. I said, they didn't bring it up when I got over there, and I damn sure didn't bring it up. So I don't really know much about hellish experiences except coming back. And I can tell you, trying to get up and walk and trying to keep from peeing on yourself, and being completely humiliated and feeling worthless because your physical body doesn't work. That's a hellish experience, but we come back because the purpose of us being makes an important statement that there is a life after this one, and that it's very structured, very orderly, and very, very just and very, very fair. And we all have an opportunity in this short lifespan, 78 years for Americans. In this short lifspan, we have an opportunity to be as caring, as creative, as conscious, compassionate, and as loving as ever. And it has so much meaning to the unfoldment of a galaxy, of a universe, we got 1.1 billion planets and stars in just our little Milky Way, in our little galaxy. And they say there's 10 trillion galaxies. So think about being able to affect that with compassionate, caring, and love, as opposed to narcissistic, macho, domineering, controlling, manipulative nature, capitalism. Spiritualistic capitalism as opposed to godless capitalism.
It's so great that you laid it out that way, because I think the way society is structured, and I think our education system is structured, it doesn't teach many of the things you described. So the picture of reality that you're painting and many other scientists are painting basically suggests that we are at a very primitive stage of our evolution as a species.
But I don't believe that either.
Okay,
here's what I believe. I believe that this is structured just right. Because you are fragile. And when you come here, everybody's in the same boat. Nobody dies. You're a spiritual being. You've been around forever. And you've done this in so many other levels of consciousness. By the time you get a chance to be physical, or to think that you're physical, to be able to put on a mindset that you're physical, we already know scientifically that's impossible. We know it. Science can prove that there is no such thing. It's just electrons, neutrons, protons, and then subatomic neutrinos, But when you earn the right to think that you're separate from things and that you can influence it, and that we're all in the same boat, we can all cut our foot, get bit by a tick and get Lyme's disease, and we have to depend on each other to survive, and that the collective consciousness of a planet is how we're unfolding. Primitive, yes, because we think that war and killing each other and eliminating us from this plane of existence because they're our enemies, that is the stupidest thing you can ever think of if you believe there is a divine force. If you don't believe there's a divine force, then your reactions and interactions constitutes the lack of spiritual knowledge of yourself, not a primitive species. We are not a primitive species. This planet is unfolding, and I'll go so far as to say that I don't think that we are naturally, the physical human being is natural from this planet. I don't think that, and I become more and more convinced of that. We created or was created a way at which we entered this plane of existence. And in that's a better explanation for me than I've heard of the Big Bang Theory and all of that stuff. I mean, I study that stuff, Mark, because I need to understand. And in the course of touring the whole world, people ask a lot of questions, and I try to give them an honest, straightforward answer that is constructively helpful in how they live their lives. So always remember, you're going to be everybody you ever encounter. And when you see you, what do you hope to see? That's the most important thing.
Well, Dannion, thank you so much for making time for this and for the important messages that you're getting across. I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure this gets out to as many people as possible, because I know the kind of impact just this conversation could have, not to mention all the others. So I really commend you for everything that you're doing, and you're living a great example for everybody.
Well, I hope I haven't bored everybody, but I try to be as straightforward because this is a scary, delicate nature. And people are frightened when they go to deal with something that is guaranteed and inevitable. And I believe, Mark, thank you for what you're doing, because the more that you are aware and the more knowledge that you have about this inevitable, guaranteed event, the more powerful and empowered you will be in your life. And I'd like to tell everybody who's listening that I love them and that I appreciate them. And I hope that as they listen to this and the other people that you have in this podcast, that they at least tell other people to tune in and listen to this program. Because if we listen, we'll become more compassionate. If we listen, we'll see people telling events that they struggled with. When you go through a near-death experience, you struggle. It is not a rewarding experience. Because I remember in the early days when people would tell me their stories, it'd say, I went and told my doctor, and my doctor told me that was something I had to talk to my minister about. I went and told my minister, and my minister told me that was something I needed to talk to my psychiatrist about. I went and talked to my psychiatrist and told the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, that's something you need to talk to your minister about, when it was the minister that sent you to the psychiatrist. So as people go through this and become more aware of it, they will feel that is either right or wrong. Being intellectual is important, but being compassionate and feeling is even more, because how we feel things tells us more about the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do than rationalizing or listening to it or making up a reason to do it.
I think that's a fantastic message. And I want to thank you again, Dannion. Are there any other messages you'd like to get across, or anything else you'd like to discuss?
Well, that pretty well covers it. People can go to Dannion and Catherine. That's where we house everything. We have Facebook presences. We try to interact in the social media. I want people to be empowered. I don't want people to live in fear, and I don't want them to be controlled and manipulated. I have been down this path so many times, and it has to be for some reason. I don't think that it's happenstance. But I have a good range, and I have 40 years of being at the bedside. I have a good understanding. I think what's important for everybody to do, if somebody said they had a near-death experience, ask them what they did the next 6 months. What did they do for the next 6 months? Because the people who had this experience, they are empowered and their lives change. One of the great joys that I have in my life, Mark, is the people who come up to me and tell me that they became hospice volunteers hearing my lectures and hearing my presentations, that they didn't have to have a near-death experience to become a hospice volunteer. And by being that hospice volunteer or that caregiver, how much it has empowered their life to be able to face and deal with what we call the next level of consciousness. And I'm really thankful for everybody who I have affected that way, because I'll get to be them. and I'll get to see them interact with the person at the bedside. And I think that's going to be exciting. But thanks for what you're doing too, Mark.
I really appreciate it, and I think what you're doing is incredible. So it's really an inspiration. Thanks for listening to another full-length interview from my podcast, Where is My Mind? I hope you enjoyed it. Check out the show notes at markgober.com/podcast for more information on the guests I've interviewed. Also, don't forget to check out the show, which features clips from many of these interviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please tell your friends. This has been Mark Gober, and thanks for your support.